Christian Longo was the kind of man who could talk his way into trust. He moved through the world presenting himself as a devoted husband, a caring father, and a man forever on the brink of a fresh start. To people who met him briefly, he seemed polite, articulate, even charming. But behind that carefully constructed image was a pattern of deception that grew deeper and more dangerous over time. When his family suddenly vanished, the story he told shifted again and again, unraveling into one of the most disturbing cases of betrayal hidden behind an ordinary face. In December 2001, the quiet coastal town of Newport, Oregon, became the center of a horrifying mystery when the body of a 4-year-old boy was discovered floating in the murky waters of Lint Slough. Within days, more bodies would surface from the cold Pacific waters, each discovery more devastating than the last. What investigators would uncover was a crime so unthinkable that it would shock the nation and raise questions about how someone could destroy the very people they were supposed to protect. This is the story of Christian Longo, a man who appeared to be a devoted family man, but harbored secrets that would lead to unspeakable tragedy. Christian Michael Longo was born on January 23, 1974, in Iowa, and grew up in Ypsilanti Township, Michigan. By all outward appearances, he seemed like an ordinary young man trying to build a life for himself. In 1993, when Christian was just 19 years old, he married Mary Jane Baker, who was 26 at the time. Despite their age difference, the couple seemed committed to building a future together. Over the next several years, they would have 3 children, Zachary, Sadie, and Madison. To those who knew them, the Longos appeared to be a typical young family navigating the challenges of parenthood and making ends meet. The family eventually settled in Newport, Oregon, a picturesque coastal community where Christian found work at a local Starbucks. Mary Jane stayed home to care for their 3 young children, dedicating herself fully to motherhood. She was also deeply involved in her faith as a Jehovah's Witness, regularly attending their local Kingdom Hall and raising the children within that religious community. Friends and neighbors described the couple as devoted parents who spent their free time enjoying simple pleasures like sailing and working on jigsaw puzzles together. After 8 years of marriage, they seemed to have created a stable, loving home for their children. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, serious problems were brewing. Christian Longo had a significant flaw that would prove catastrophic. He was reckless with money. His spending habits consistently put the family in financial difficulty, creating stress and instability that grew worse over time. This wasn't just occasional overspending or poor budgeting. Christian's relationship with money revealed something deeper about his character, a pattern of behavior that prioritized his own desires over his family's needs. The financial pressures mounted, and whatever facade of stability the family had maintained began to crumble. What happened next would transform Christian Longo from a struggling father into one of America's most wanted fugitives. On December 19, 2001, a discovery was made that would send shockwaves through the Newport community. The body of 4-year-old Zachary Longo was found in Lint Slough, a backwater of the Alsea River estuary. The little boy's life had been stolen from him in the most cruel way imaginable. He had been asphyxiated. But this was only the beginning of the horror. 3 days later, on December 22nd, divers searching the frigid waters of the Pacific Ocean located the body of 3-year-old Sadie less than a mile offshore. Like her brother, she too had been killed by asphyxiation. The community was reeling, unable to comprehend what was happening. Where were Mary Jane and 2-year-old Madison? The answer would come 5 days later, and it would be even more disturbing. On December 27, 2001, investigators made a grim discovery at Embarcadero Marina. Mary Jane Longo's body was found stuffed nude inside suitcases that had been dumped in the water near a boat ramp. The 34-year-old mother had been strangled to death. That same day, in a different suitcase dropped off at the same dock, they found 2-year-old Madison. The baby had also been strangled. The entire family had been murdered. The children had been disposed of in the water like garbage, their small bodies weighted down or cast into the ocean. Mary Jane had been crammed into luggage and discarded. The brutality of the crimes was almost incomprehensible. Who could do such a thing? Investigators didn't have to look far for their primary suspect. Christian Longo had vanished. As the bodies of his family were being discovered one by one, he was nowhere to be found. He had fled, leaving behind the carnage of his own making. But Christian wasn't just running. He was living a completely different life, one that revealed just how calculated and cold-blooded his actions had been. While his children's bodies floated in Oregon waters and his wife lay murdered, Christian Longo was in Cancun, Mexico, enjoying himself at a hotel. He had assumed a new identity, taking the name of Michael Finkel, a former New York Times reporter. The choice of this particular identity would later become a bizarre footnote in an already strange story, eventually leading to a book and movie about their unusual connection. Christian Longo was recognized at his hotel in Cancun on December 27, 2001, the same day that Mary Jane and Madison's bodies were discovered. By this point, he was wanted in connection with the murders of his entire family. A federal arrest warrant was issued in the United States District Court for the District of Oregon, charging him with multiple counts of aggravated murder and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. On January 11, 2002, Christian Longo was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list as number 469. He left the Cancun hotel on January 7, 2002, perhaps sensing that authorities were closing in. He traveled south to the small town of Tulum, Quintana Roo, about 80 miles from Cancun. But his time as a fugitive was running out. On January 13, 2002, just 2 days after being added to the 10 Most Wanted list, Christian Longo was captured in Tulum without incident. The manhunt was over. He was taken into United States custody at George Bush Intercontinental Airport on January 14, 2002. The man who had murdered his entire family and fled to Mexico to live under a stolen identity was finally in custody. Now he would face justice for what he had done. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His own children, the little ones he had helped bring into this world, had been killed by his hands. His wife, who had devoted herself to their family and faith, had been strangled and stuffed into suitcases. There could be no explanation that would make sense of such evil. The trial of Christian Longo drew national attention. In 2003, he was convicted and sentenced to death for the murders of his wife and 3 children. The jury heard the horrific details of how each family member had died. They learned about the suitcases, the weighted bodies in the water, the deliberate disposal of his own children. They heard about his flight to Mexico and his assumption of another man's identity. The evidence painted a picture of a man who had methodically killed his family and then tried to escape to start a new life. There was no moment of passion, no sudden loss of control. This was calculated murder. Christian Longo was sent to death row at Oregon State Penitentiary, where he would spend the next 2 decades. Years after his conviction, Christian Longo wrote a letter to a woman that was obtained by Katu TV in Portland, Oregon. In this letter, he admitted to being a narcissist. He wrote that he had begun studying what a psychologist had said about him and came to terms with it, almost totally agreeing with the assessment. The psychologist's conclusion was narcissistic personality disorder, specifically what he called the compensatory type, which is basically self-centeredness related to a damaged core sense of self. This admission was telling. Even from prison, even after murdering his entire family, Christian Longo's focus remained on himself. He could intellectualize his disorder, discuss it in clinical terms, but there was no real evidence of genuine remorse or understanding of the magnitude of what he had taken from the world. The story of Christian Longo and Michael Finkel, the reporter whose identity he stole, became the subject of a book called True Story, written by Finkel himself. The memoir explored their strange relationship and the psychological dynamics between them. In 2015, the book was adapted into a film also called True Story, starring James Franco as Christian Longo and Jonah Hill as Michael Finkel. The movie brought renewed attention to the case, though some questioned whether a family annihilator deserved to have his story told in Hollywood. The film explored how Finkel, who had been fired from the New York Times for fabricating parts of a story, became fascinated by the man who had stolen his identity. It was a strange collision of two men who had both, in different ways, lived lies. While on death row, Christian Longo found a new cause to champion. In 2011, he founded an organization called Gifts of Anatomical Value from Everyone, or GAVE. The organization advocates for death row prisoners being allowed to donate their organs after execution. Currently, most death row prisoners are denied requests to donate their organs because infectious diseases within American prisons occur at higher levels than in the general population. Diseases like HIV/AIDS, hepatitis C, and tuberculosis are more widespread in prison environments. However, Longo argued that death row inmates interested in donating their organs could undergo intensive screening far ahead of their execution. He even wrote an opinion piece for the New York Times in March 2011 titled "Giving Life After Death Row," making his case for organ donation from executed prisoners. The organ donation advocacy raised complicated ethical questions. On one hand, if organs could save lives, shouldn't they be used regardless of the source? On the other hand, was this simply another way for Christian Longo to seek attention and present himself as someone trying to do good? Some saw it as a genuine attempt to create something positive from a terrible situation. Others viewed it as narcissism in action, another way for Longo to make himself the center of attention and craft a narrative where he could be seen as thoughtful and altruistic despite having murdered his own children. The sister of Mary Jane Longo called Christian a monster who wouldn't let the family heal, suggesting that his continued public presence, even from prison, was causing ongoing pain to those who loved his victims. For nearly 2 decades, Christian Longo sat on death row in Oregon. The state had not carried out an execution since 1997, and there was growing debate about the death penalty's place in modern society. Then, on December 13, 2022, Oregon Governor Kate Brown made a sweeping decision that would affect Christian Longo and every other person on the state's death row. She commuted the sentences of all 17 people on Oregon's death row to life without parole. This meant that Christian Longo would never be executed for his crimes. Instead, he would spend the rest of his natural life in prison, with no possibility of ever being released. For some, this was a just outcome that avoided the moral complications of state-sanctioned execution. For others, particularly the family members of his victims, it may have felt like he was escaping the full measure of justice. The case of Christian Longo forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about human nature. How does a father kill his own children? What happens in someone's mind that allows them to strangle their wife and stuff her body in a suitcase? Christian himself provided some insight with his admission of narcissistic personality disorder, but clinical diagnoses can only explain so much. The financial pressures he faced were real, but countless people face financial difficulties without murdering their families. Something in Christian Longo was fundamentally broken, something that allowed him to prioritize his own escape and freedom over the lives of 4 innocent people who depended on him. His children trusted him completely, as all children trust their parents. Mary Jane had built a life with him, had faith in him. He betrayed that trust in the most absolute way possible. What makes the Christian Longo case particularly haunting is the premeditation involved. This wasn't a moment of rage or a sudden snap. He killed each family member, disposed of their bodies in different locations, fled to another country, and assumed a false identity to start fresh. Every step required planning and deliberate action. He had to look at his children, at his wife, and make the conscious choice to end their lives. He had to physically move their bodies, weight them down, or pack them in luggage, and dispose of them in the water. Then he had to board a plane to Mexico and check into a hotel, all while knowing what he had done. The level of compartmentalization required for such actions suggests something deeply disturbed in his psychological makeup. The victims in this case deserve to be remembered as more than just statistics in a true crime story. Zachary was 4 years old, just beginning to develop his personality and discover the world. Sadie was 3, still a toddler full of wonder and trust. Madison was only 2, a baby who had barely begun her life. Mary Jane was 34, a devoted mother and woman of faith who had committed herself to raising her children and supporting her family. They had dreams, hopes, and futures that were stolen from them. They experienced fear and pain in their final moments at the hands of someone who should have protected them above all else. Their lives mattered, and they were taken far too soon by someone who should have loved them most. Today, Christian Longo remains incarcerated in Oregon, serving life without parole. He will never walk free. He will never feel the sun on his face as a free man or make his own choices about how to spend his days. He will grow old in prison, surrounded by concrete and steel, living with the knowledge of what he did. Whether he truly feels remorse or simply regrets being caught is something only he knows. His advocacy for organ donation continues, though it's unclear how much impact it has had on policy or public opinion. The families of his victims continue to live with the loss he created, carrying grief that will never fully heal. The community of Newport, Oregon, was forever changed by the murders that took place there in December 2001. The story of Christian Longo is a reminder that evil can wear an ordinary face. It can live next door, work at the local coffee shop, and appear to be just another person trying to get by. The warning signs may be there, hidden beneath the surface, but they're not always visible until it's too late. Financial irresponsibility, narcissism, and a willingness to prioritize oneself above all others can be a dangerous combination. But even knowing this, it's almost impossible to predict when someone will cross the line from selfishness into violence. We want to believe that parents protect their children, that spouses honor their commitments, that people have limits they won't cross. Christian Longo showed us that some people have no such limits. That's all for today. Don't forget to subscribe and be kind to each other.